It has been the 10th year of our long-distance love race with Ethan. I accidentally answered his call. And Nian. Our kitten has given birth to a litter of kittens. It was a gentle female voice. And the caller ID was, Little Flower Cat. He's taking a bath. Call back later. I hung up the call coldly. That night, Ethan frantically picked up the clothes scattered on the floor, put them on randomly, and rushed out. And I smashed our home, and wiped out everything of mine. Then I got on the plane flying abroad. 3 years later, Ethan stopped me on a vacation island, staring fixedly at Tommy beside me, who somewhat resembled him, with red-eyed. He asked, "Mine?" One Ethan was full of energy, while I was so tortured that I could hardly keep my eyes open. The mobile phone beside me kept ringing, and in a daze, I clicked to answer it. And Nian. Our kitten has given birth to a litter of kittens. Obviously it was a gentle and lovely female voice. But my head seemed to explode and all my sleepiness disappeared. I glanced at it and saw that the caller ID was Little Flower Cat. And Nian? The other side called. I took a light breath and replied in a calm tone. He's taking a bath. Call back later. The other side paused for a moment and then hung up. When Ethan came out of the bathroom, he was only wearing a towel around his lower body. The undried water droplets on his body slid down along the muscle lines and seeped into the towel. There were also several fresh scratch marks on his body. My masterpieces. Why don't you sleep a little more? He stared at my collarbone with red marks. And his eyes darkened a little more. When he was about to lower his head and get close to me, I handed him my mobile phone. He frowned with dissatisfaction, took the phone away and threw it casually. Then confined my hands and his breath wandered around me faintly. Little Flower Cat. I said. The person buried on my neck side stopped moving. She called you and said your kitten has given birth. Ethan suddenly became clear-headed, frantically picked up the clothes scattered beside the bed, put them on randomly and rushed out. I was alone in the home that we had decorated together, watching him run towards another girl. To the girl was his blind date. They started to contact each other 3 months ago. It took them less than a month from getting to know each other to confirming their relationship. And they also raised a stray cat together. She shared delicious food, music, and even an ordinary cloud with him. He responded to everything. He took a picture of his dinner casually, cut off my trace and then sent it to her. As for the chat records between Ethan and me, it was all about work except work. Only when we were entwined in the middle of the night would he murmur "wife" in my ear, and added noun. But I had cherished it in my heart like a precious treasure for a full 10 years. I smiled. I fumbled out Ethan's cigarette pack from the drawer, probably because I hadn't smoked for a long time. I choked on it. I coughed until tears came out. My colleague Yo-Yo sent me a message. Sister Natalie. Do you know that Mr. Ethan is in love? Ethan and I had always been strictly business-like in front of others and often quarreled because of different opinions. No one dared to imagine that Ethan would put me on his lap and tease me. What can I do with the person I chose? Just spoil her. What an anti-human scene it was. And today, Ethan pulled that girl into the company's group chat. Hello, everyone. I'm Gina. Mr. Ethan's little assistant. Nice to meet you all. Her group note was, and Nian's Little Flower Cat. Many things can be understood without being clearly stated. I don't know how Ethan explained the call that I answered. All I know is that Gina added everyone in the company, and checked one by one. Yo-Yo sent me an eye-rolling emoji. It's already annoying to go to work. And now I'm regarded as an imaginary rival. After a while, Gina posted a WeChat moments, with a picture of a cup of green tea. The caption was, "Don't touch other people's mobile phones randomly. It's so ill-mannered," and gave it a like. I expressionlessly picked up a baseball bat beside me and smashed the house randomly. Seeing the mess all over the floor, I smiled with satisfaction. When the housekeeper came, I was sitting on the only sofa that hadn't been messed up. In a daze. It wasn't that it was so precious, but I was just tired. Really. So tired. Miss Natalie. Are you all right? Probably seeing that I was too embarrassed. The person asked me. And Ethan's chat box still stayed as it was 2 hours ago. I gently shook my head and showed a sincere smile. Take away all the ladies' items here. 3 Ethan and I were college classmates. He grew up in a big courtyard. His family had arranged his future for him, and he only needed to follow obediently. But he was stubborn. After breaking away from his family, he started his own business. I was his first partner. He provided the capital, and I provided the labor. I had asked him why he chose me. There were no lack of people more capable than me in the university. He casually twirled his pen and stared at me fixedly. With a sincere smile, he said, I like you. I was stunned for a moment. That unyielding spirit. Once upon a time, my ambitious vitality was what he admired. Later, this ambition became what he feared. And Gina is different from me. She is very simple. The person he wants to marry is exactly this kind of unambiguous little white flower who revolves around him. He is very clear knowing what he needs and putting it into practice. He and I are the same kind of people, resisting and struggling, like lurking hunters. Because of this, we tacitly compete with each other in the business world. The detours at the wine table and the ruthlessness in actual combat have helped us rise rapidly. On the night when we earned our first pot of gold, we both drank too much. Lying on the bed, red banknotes were scattered all around. Ethan turned his head to look at me, with emotions in his eyes that I couldn't understand. Natalie, you're so amazing. I smiled and said, you're not bad either. Due to the high-intensity work, Ethan, this young master, finally got sick and had a high fever. I was busy taking care of him, but he turned over and covered me under him. I still remember that the corners of his eyes were red, and his whole body was as red as a well-cooked braised prawn because of the high fever. I like you. This time there was no pause, nor any suffix. He no longer restrained his emotions. What lingered at the tip of my nose was the faint smell of tobacco mixed with mint on him. The fragmented sobs were swallowed up by him. It was very hot. Hot enough to make people's hearts boil and sink together. For I moved back to my own house. Over the years, I have become pampered. I have developed the problem of being unable to sleep well in an unfamiliar bed and was sleepless all night. When I returned to the company, I happened to meet Ethan. I nodded politely and distantly. Ethan frowned. Ah, Nian. Gina trotted over and stood between us. Hello. I'm on Eon's Fanki. I nodded and replied. Hello. Hearing my voice, her face showed a trace of distortion. I didn't exchange any more pleasantries and went straight into the elevator. Natalie. Right? Gina caught up, and Ethan followed closely behind. I often hear on and mention you. You're very excellent in workability. However, women should not show their faces often and mingle with men. It's not very good. It's more comfortable and relaxing to go shopping with sisters and have beauty treatments. Leave the work to men. Right. On Nian? Ethan stroked her hair. Extremely gentle. Dare I say no? I didn't react much to Gina's provocation. She probably recognized my voice and was eager to show off their love in front of me and declare her ownership of Ethan. At the company, please call me President Natalie. If you don't know how, I'll ask the personnel department to arrange training for you, including food and accommodation. I no longer cared about the reactions of the people behind me and flicked the place Gina had touched. However, my reaction angered Ethan. After sending Gina away, he walked straight into my office. I frowned with dissatisfaction. Ethan, knocking on the door is basic courtesy. I emphasized the last 4 words very strongly. I threw Gina's words back at him all. He hooked his lips and bent down, trapping me between his arms and the sofa. It was you who opened the door voluntarily last night. His eyes swept over the hem of my skirt, implying something. Slap. I didn't hesitate to slap him. His fair face was instantly stained with a bright red fingerprint. Ethan pushed his cheek and smiled. then got up and sat opposite me. I've already asked someone to transfer the ownership of the villa in the west of the city to your name. And a piece of land you liked before is about to be approved. Ethan half lifted his eyelids, looking calm. Let's part on good terms. He can always accurately hit my sore spots. The knife I handed him, finally, all of them stabbed into my body. At this time, he was high above, just like my so-called stepfathers. While talking about love, they use money to buy out love. The lover game driven by novelty is beautified in the name of love. When Gina rushed over with a lunchbox, she happened to see me splashing water on Ethan. She screamed and rushed in, slapping me. I've never been in the habit of taking losses. The only loss was probably being defeated by Ethan once. The hand I raised stopped in midair and was grabbed by Ethan. He stood in front of Gina, his voice angry. Natalie, this is not the place for you to go crazy. I raised my other hand and slapped his face hard again. Looking at the symmetrical fingerprints on Ethan's face, I immediately felt good. Without on Nian, could you, a woman, have reached your current position today? Gina stepped forward to defend Ethan. You're fired. Why? Gina raised her head, trying to look more imposing. Just because I hold 30 of the shares. And just because you broke into my office without permission and assaulted a company senior. Gina panicked and her eyes dodged a little. Seeing that Ethan didn't scold her, she continued to brazenly provoke me. And Nian is the largest shareholder. And I'm on Nian's fiancé. What are you? If anyone should leave, it should be you. There was already a circle of people gathered at the office entrance. Ethan remained silent, tacitly approving of her behavior and supporting her. There was no need to continue this kind of dispute. Fine. Let's break up. I'll sell you my shares at the market price. Ethan. I've done all I could. Ethan, who had been silent all this time, showed a few cracks in his cold face after I took out the agreement. Probably he didn't expect that I had already drawn up the agreement and was ready to leave. Gina had a smile on her lips. Indeed. Those who are favored have nothing to fear. Who called the police? I covered my face and walked forward, staggering a bit on the way. Officer. I've been beaten. I'm dizzy and feel like vomiting right now. 5 after getting the injury checked in the hospital. It was a mild concussion. If I refused to reach a settlement, Gina would be detained for at least a few days. Ethan had a meaningful faint smile on his face, looking as if he had seen through the trick. And finally, Gina panicked and nervously tugged at Ethan's clothes. On Nian. I don't want to stay here overnight. I'm scared. Ethan gently coaxed her not to be afraid, saying that he would support her no matter what. Once the money power was used, I wasn't an unaccommodating person either. After leaving the police station, Ethan dragged me into the shadows. For the sake of money, you've really lost all your self-respect. I hooked his tie and pulled it hard. He had to lower his head to be at eye level with me, trampling on my dignity to support the new girl. You should have thought about the consequences. Instead of getting angry, Ethan laughed and raised his hand to support my lower back, pressing me against him. Control your temper. No man can stand you like this. I pushed him away in disgust and walked towards the parking lot. Ethan followed me, and his neither too light nor too heavy voice came. You know my mother. Her health hasn't been good in the past years, and Gina just suits her taste. I ignored him, opened the car door, but Ethan raised his hand to block it. Natalie, I can give you everything except marriage. Get lost. I slammed the car door hard and drove away. In the rear-view mirror, he stood with his hands in his pockets, his back to the light, and his expression was indistinguishable. The streetlight elongated his lonely figure. 6 I spun around and stuck my finger down my throat in the hospital toilet. I disgusted Ethan and Gina, but I didn't feel good either. When I got home, I just fell asleep. The next day when I woke up, I received a call from my mother. Natalie, it's been a long time since you last came home for dinner. I looked at the date and agreed. The person who opened the door for me was a stranger. Natalie. This is your Uncle Wang. My mother introduced to me. I sighed. It was my mother's new boyfriend. Unlike the refined and noble men in the past, this Uncle Wang looked like a down-to-earth person. At the dinner table, my mother enthusiastically served me food. Natalie, Uncle Wang has a son who just graduated this year. Let him come and help in your company. Although I was prepared, a sense of loneliness still flashed through my heart. I've resigned. Why did you resign so suddenly? Did you make Ethan unhappy? My mother put down her chopsticks in surprise. After thinking for a while, she suggested to me, later, buy some fruits and go plead with him. Xiao I and doesn't seem like a person who forgets old friendships. Clang! I threw the chopsticks on the ground, making a cracking sound. My mother choked up and cried on Uncle Wang's shoulder. This child has been stubborn since she was young. Whenever she's not happy, she throws things around and loses her temper. If it weren't for her father abandoning us, would I have to endure all the scorn while raising the child alone? Is it easy for me? Uncle Wang hugged my mother lovingly. He comforted her that he would be there for her in the future, so she wouldn't have to face these things alone. Yes. You're the only one in the world who's right. You're the most aggrieved. I sneered and ignored the affectionate scene behind me, then turned around and left. Since I became sensible, being isolated and bullied made up my entire childhood. I was just a bargaining chip for my mother to hold on to my biological father. Time and time again, her entanglement and retention angered his legal wife. My mother could only take me to wander from city to city. No one welcomed our arrival, and they always wanted to take advantage of us. Like a stray dog, I drove those people away and fought for my legitimate rights. But in their mouth, I became a petty and fatherless wild child. A family can't do without a man. Otherwise, we, a mother and daughter, will be bullied. My mother was soft-natured. She pinned her hopes on men, looking for them one after another, and new uncles with ulterior motives kept approaching. That year, I was 12 years old. When I got home, I ran into a drunk man pressing my mother to the ground and beating her. The person on the verge of death on the ground was the only relative I had in this world. I used all my strength to fight with the adult man. The man out of his mind took out a knife. I actually heaved a sigh of relief, sighing that everything could end. But my mother threw herself in front of me, hugging me without hesitation, and her clothes were gradually stained red. I thought, in this life, we were doomed to torture each other. 7. You've contributed so much to the company. Are you really willing to leave? Yo-Yo was someone I had trained. She was very sorry about my departure. I propped my chin and took a sip of sake lightly. Willing? 10 years of love-hate entanglements. And I once fantasized about the future as well. When a choice between two options under measurement emerges, there is no home in this situation. What's done cannot be undone. Leaving in time to cut losses is the best among the worst options. Seeing that I had no intention of turning back, Yo-Yo started complaining to me. In order to comfort Gina, Ifan gave her a sinecure as an executive in the company. And Gina was suspicious all day long. She was on guard against and interrogated every unmarried woman in the company, formulated all kinds of absurd assessments, and even required women not to wear makeup or skirts to work. Customers couldn't be exempted either. And as a result, several orders were lost. This was unexpected to me. Ethan, who had always been calm and reliable, would allow such unreasonable actions. Perhaps the Ethan I knew was never the real him. Or perhaps his preference for Gina was an exception. But all of this has nothing to do with me anymore. On the day I left Beijing, it was drizzling. My mother was busy building a relationship with her new son. She just gave a few hasty instructions on the phone and then hung up. Before boarding the plane, Jake called me. He was Ethan's childhood friend. We had met several times and were fairly acquainted. I don't know where he got the news that I was going abroad. Natalie, you don't need to hide abroad. I've arranged a gathering. And Ethan will come too. Let's talk everything out. And we can still be friends. A private room. Jake clutched his mobile phone, his face looking a bit ugly. On the other end of the phone, Natalie hung up directly. When he called again, there was only a mechanical female voice. All of a sudden, the atmosphere in the private room dropped to freezing point. Ethan's eyes were extremely dim at the moment, suppressing his anger. This call was made at his instigation. He originally thought that if he showed weakness, the other party would take the opportunity to reconcile. Asking himself, hadn't he been nice enough to her? When he first noticed Natalie, it was indeed because of her beautiful face. Later, he was attracted by her unyielding spirit. He still remembered that Natalie stood on the awarding platform and questioned the principal about the fairness of the scholarship. A small figure confronting the worldly rules. He admitted that Natalie was excellent. But in Beijing, the last thing lacking was talented people. He gave her resources, gave her connections, promoted her to the position she was in today, and even made their relationship public in front of his friends. What else could she be dissatisfied with? Ethan, since you can't let go and get her back. Jake had just lost his wife and sincerely advised. Ethan irritably lit a cigarette and snorted coldly. Just for fun. And she really thinks she's something special. On the surface, Ethan was nonchalant. But his recent abnormal behaviors all proved his bluff. For example, he deliberately indulged Gina's mischief and had someone bring the news to Natalie. He also inquired about Natalie's situation from time to time. He stopped several times downstairs at Natalie's place and then left. Jake had advised him several times to see his true feelings clearly. Ethan didn't take it seriously. Why should Natalie be so tough with him? It was just because he cared about her a little. He could give Natalie everything. And he could also take it all back. Now that his relationship with his family had eased, he only needed to say a word. There were plenty of people eager to do things for him. What would it be like for a calculating person to lose everything? He was waiting for that day. The day when Natalie was at the end of her rope and bowed her head to him in submission. At that time, for the sake of their 10-year friendship, he would reluctantly accept. 9. After turning off my phone, my world was unusually quiet. I had been on the go for the past few years and didn't dare to stop for a moment. It seemed that once I stopped, the world would abandon me. Natalie, what are you chasing? I asked myself. My heart felt empty, and there was no answer. It is said that at the end of the world, those who have seen the aurora will have all their wishes come true. After landing in Northern Europe, I found a homestay to stay in. Athol and I had once come here on a business trip, but it was snowing at that time, and we hurried back to China. There were many people with the same purpose as me, and coincidentally, we all stayed in the same homestay. Some of them were friends, relatives or lovers. So, spontaneously, we formed a temporary sightseeing group. This small town has no high-rise buildings, only endless snow-capped mountains and fjords. The sunset glow reflected on the top of the white snow-capped mountains. A plane took off against the afterglow, stirring up flocks of seagulls, circling in the air and chirping. When night fell, the clouds piled up, and there were only a few stars. But there are always more solutions than problems. Someone proposed to chase the aurora. A few of us rented a car and hired a local, or a hunter, and started this naive or a chasing journey. The car drove all the way through the hazy night until the light on the horizon lit up. It's the aurora. Someone cheered joyfully. The light mass with the same color of the sky and water, passing through layers of mountains, hit the soul directly. Why don't you make a wish? Someone asked me. I was speechless. Perhaps I used to have a lot of wishes. For example, that my mother could care more about me. Or, for example, the years to come with Ethan. But at this moment, I couldn't even say a word. I hope my mother's illness will get better. The boy beside me prayed piously. I imitated the boy, put my hands together and silently prayed in my heart. Then I wish myself good health and all my wishes come true. The travelers beside the bonfire held hot cocoa in their hands and told their own stories. Some people promised to be a couple for a lifetime for the sake of love. Some people, with their last hope, prayed that their relatives would be free from disasters. I had never been so calmly immersed in this moment before. In the past, there was only weighing the pros and cons in my mind. Risk analysis of one thing. Confirmation of the data of the rate of return. Being sentimental has always been a luxury for me. Because once I fall into the abyss, no one will give me a hand. And some may even step on me a few more times. The appearance of Ethan made me take a few moments of leisure in the suffocating time to think about the emotional area that I dared not touch. I told him over and over again about my shortcomings, my family, and my embarrassments, in order to scare him away. Because I'm not a person worthy of his dedication. But he walked towards me firmly time and time again, affirming everything about me. And in the end, he broke everything, smashing it to pieces. He thrust knives into my heart one after another. Bloody and extremely exhilarating, the heavy snow embraced me, and the tears in my eyes first froze into frost. I spread my arms wide, immersed myself in dancing with the snow, responding to this illusory comfort. It's no big deal, Natalie. The thick dark clouds pressed in, and people sighed in disappointment. Bad luck. It's snowing. Let's go back. On the way back, the accident came suddenly. The car rolled over several times, and it was all white outside. Avalanche. Sounds of panic, blame, and self-pity filled my ears. I had imagined countless times what it would be like for the family to go to the amusement park. I could tie a beautiful bow, ride on my father's shoulders, put away all my prickles, and like a real child, point at the favorite plush doll and act coquettish lie. Mom, I want that one. But at the moment of life and death, I suddenly realized, the bonds between people have always been phased. Whether it is family affection, friendship or love. Just like now, the original resentment in the car has turned into mutual encouragement. We will all survive. I don't know who shouted, and everyone began to chisel the window vigorously. Before this, we were not familiar with each other. Because of the same journey, we encouraged each other. After today, after this journey, we will become passing travelers in each other's lives. After being rescued, I lay powerless on the ground. I drew a small sun on the soft snow, a mark exclusive to Natalie. With the passage of time and replacement, my mark will also be erased. But I have indeed been here. Love yourself first. When trapped in the mire, only you can save yourself. I think my own journey has just begun. 10 Mrs. Ethan's birthday banquet. Gina was wearing a dark blue dress, standing with Mrs. Ethan. The people attending the banquet were either rich or noble. Ethan stood on the edge of the crowd, looking at the night in a daze, as if this bustle had nothing to do with him. People passing by with wine glasses in their hands came to congratulate one after another. Congratulations to young Ethan for finding a beautiful woman. Yes. This day was also a great day for his engagement to Gina. People thought that young Ethan was so overjoyed that he kept pouring wine for himself glass after glass. The drunken Ethan hugged Gina, but called out my name. This was the on-site video sent to me by Yo-Yo. The incident that day was a big deal. Gina left the scene in tears. Ethan was beaten by his father and sent directly to the hospital. Sister Natalie, I didn't know you had a relationship with Ethan. And I kept mentioning Gina's affairs to you. You must have been very sad at that time. On the other end of the phone, Yo-Yo apologized to me. I shook my head. It was all in the past. Up to now. I also understand. Ethan has never placed me in an equal position. Perhaps he has some feelings for me, but it's only a little. He can be with Gina for the family's interests. And he can also use means to make me bow my head for his own desires. He lifted me up here, and he also has the ability to take it all back. My real estate was inexplicably blocked, and most of my funds and stocks evaporated. thinking back to that early morning text message, "Come back to me, and all this will still be yours." Threats and lures were once one of the means we used in the business field. Now, he uses it against the person who once fought side by side with me. I smiled calmly, removed the phone card and threw it into the trash can, walking against the light to my next stop. 11 in the hospital. Ethan was wrapped in bandages. The assistant stood trembling beside him, bending over to report to him. Since the boss publicly revealed his relationship with President Natalie at his own engagement banquet, he has lost his former calmness and become even more irritable. The general manager's office was also in great distress. It was almost in contact with foreign countries all day long, monitoring everything Natalie did abroad, and reporting every detail. President Natalie. She is out of contact. Avalanche. Buried underground. Didn't. Ethan's heart suddenly trembled, and his pupils were almost out of focus. Before the assistant could finish speaking, a cup brushed past his forehead and fell to the ground. Nonsense. Get out. Ethan, as if going mad, regardless of his still unrecovered broken ribs, propped himself up on crutches and went to investigate in person. The reply he got was still that this person was in a state of being out of contact. The news happened to be reporting that an avalanche caused by extreme weather in a small town in Western Europe had buried some tourists and the rescue was in progress. She'll be fine. Ethan shook his head while comforting himself. She's so cunning. She must be hiding secretly. Despite being dissuaded, Ethan immediately asked someone to prepare a private plane. He wanted to go to Northern Europe as quickly as possible to bring her back. But before he could walk out of the hospital entrance, he was carried back to the ward by others, in order to prevent his injuries from getting worse. Mrs. Ethan had to order people to tie Ethan to the bed and inject him with a sedative. She had never seen her son in such a crazy and irrational state. Ethan had once brought that girl home, but the girl was born into a pure family, was full of thoughts, not pure enough, and carried too many burdens. Mrs. Ethan, having lived for most of her life, had also seen the means of such women around her husband. She just didn't want her son to go through this again. Mom, please let me go find her. Ethan, who was extremely thin on the hospital bed, begged. Her heart softened, and she promised her son that as long as he took good care of his injuries, she would bring the girl back. The Ethan family used all their connections, but it was still of no avail. They only found a diary and a pregnancy report. The report showed that Natalie had been pregnant for more than 3 months. Ethan's eyes were red as he opened the diary with trembling fingertips. Ethan, you once said that lovers who have seen the aurora will meet again in the next life. Unfortunately, we haven't seen it and we've been separated. I brought the baby to see it. The aurora is very beautiful. If you were here, you would surely be shocked by the wonder of nature too. Well, I'm pregnant. Although you took contraceptive measures, this life has still come secretly. Is this our unbroken bond in the dark? I want to go back to the country to find you and tell you about the baby's existence. I'm clearly a victim of growing up in this kind of environment. But at this moment, I'm even nastily thinking of using the child to keep you. And news is reporting your wedding news with Gina. I cancelled my return flight. I want to share every new thing I've encountered during the journey, even an ordinary cloud, with you. In the past, I would never have dared to think about it. I know our gap, so I didn't dare to stop for a moment, and only then dared to summon up some courage to be by your side. The heavy snow is swallowing us up. The baby and I may never be able to go back. It's God's will. The child in my womb and I have never been expected. Ethan on the hospital bed was already sobbing uncontrollably. The date stopped at date, which was exactly the 10th anniversary of their being together. The last line in the diary was, Ethan, wish you a happy new marriage, and the early birth of a healthy baby. 12 Ethan seemed like a different person, looking out of the window with a dull gaze. These days, Ethan recalled every bit of his time with Natalie. They had spent 10 years together. 10 years of days and nights. intertwined and supported each other. He had already fallen deeply, and couldn't extricate himself. It was not only physical but also spiritual compatibility. After spending a few days with Gina, he finally understood. What he wanted was not the gentle and submissive person revolving around him, but rather, with just one look from him, someone would cross thousands of obstacles and move forward at the same frequency as him. But he had lost her. Together with their child. What was he doing at that time? Oh, he was busy getting engaged to someone else. Thinking of this, Ethan's heart seemed to be about to burst. The uncontrollable will pierced through his chest. On the verge of death, Ethan lay on the bed, relying on nutrients to stay alive. Jake came to visit him several times. Seeing him on a hunger strike, he couldn't help but curse. Why didn't you do something earlier? Now that she's dead, what are you pretending for? Hearing this, Ethan struggled to get up, but due to lack of physical strength, he could only stiffen his neck and retort, "She's not dead. She and the child are both fine." If Ethan hadn't looked half dead, Jake would have wanted to beat him up. Then go find her. Gamut. Who are you pretending to be so miserable for? Hearing this, Ethan, as if injected with chicken blood, asked someone to bring food and stuffed it into his mouth desperately. His stomach had long been messed up, and he could only kneel on the ground and vomit violently. Seeing Ethan getting better, Gina came to visit. Regarding Natalie's matter, although she felt uncomfortable in her heart, but since the person was already dead, it was really degrading to compete with a dead person. Moreover, in a wealthy family marriage, there were countless couples who each played their own games. Ethan had an excellent appearance and a wealthy family, and she did have feelings for him. On the positive side, love could grow over time. On the negative side, she had been exposed to the means of wealthy families since childhood and could handle 7 or 8 out of 10. As long as she had a child by her side, she could be worry-free in the future. However, as soon as she entered the door, Ethan tightly gripped her neck. If it weren't for you, she wouldn't have taken the child abroad. How dare you show up in front of me? It was you who harmed her. As the strength tightened, Gina couldn't even shout out a complete cry for help. Ethan had gone mad. Completely mad. If Mrs. Ethan hadn't arrived in time, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Ethan's father was furious and ordered that Ethan be sent for closed-door treatment. While recuperating, Ethan lurked and waited for an opportunity to escape. Finally, one day, taking advantage of the slackness during the shift change of the medical staff, Ethan sneaked out and ran towards his former lover without hesitation. On the continuous snow-capped mountains, I have been searching year after year. 3 years later, I was on vacation on an island in the southern hemisphere. Tommy beside me waved his chubby little hands. Buy me an ice cream, please. The young man applying sunscreen on me chuckled. Call me Daddy, and I'll buy it for you. Daddy. 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 Don't spoil him. If he gets cavities again, he'll be a pain. Before I could finish speaking, the big one and the small one had already scurried away happily. I put on my sunglasses, speechless lie, and continued my sunbathing. Suddenly, the skin on my back tightened, and the strength of the palm moving on it increased a great deal. I frowned in dissatisfaction. Hiss, be gentle. The breathing behind me seemed to become a bit heavier, but I didn't pay attention. Just then, the warm palm, along my spine, suddenly pressed hard on the concave point 3 inches below my lower back. I couldn't help myself and cried out. Fortunately, there were not many people nearby, so it wasn't so embarrassing as to be a social death. I turned my head angrily and met Ethan's face full of suppressed anger. He was thin, with dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't had a good rest for a long time. Do you know how long I've been looking for you? Ethan choked up. I thought you were really. What? Are you unhappy that I'm still alive? I calmed my mood. Ethan stared at me with red-rimmed eyes, and the grievance in his voice trembled uncontrollably. I thought that if I couldn't find you in the mortal world, I would go to hell to look for you. If someone hadn't said they saw you here, you would never have seen me again. And then? Are you some kind of precious thing? I got up expressionlessly, and was about to leave. But Ethan tightly grasped my wrist and dragged me into his arms. I've been looking for you for 3 years. For 3 whole years. I could only hold the notebook you left me to get through the long, cold nights. For you. I don't want anything anymore. Even though I know you deceived me. I'm still so cheaply soft-hearted. I only beg that we can go back to the past. Isn't my sincerity enough? Are you just trampling on my feelings for you like this? Ethan's eyes were red as he roared in despair. Natalie. Do you have a heart at all? While Ethan and I were tugging at each other. Tommy. I don't know when he came back. Poked 2 ice cream cones into Ethan's knees. And the sticky cream blended with the fabric of his suit. Big bad guy. Let go quickly. Ethan lowered his eyes and stared at Tommy, who had a somewhat similar appearance to his. And a trace of tenderness flashed in his eyes. Mine? Before I could answer, Tommy called out in the distance, Daddy. Come quickly. There's a bad guy. Ethan's face sank. And he gritted his teeth and said a few words. You let my son call someone else Daddy. When Michael came back, he punched Ethan. Blood seeped from the corner of Ethan's mouth. He wiped it away and stopped the bodyguards behind him who were eager to fight. Natalie. Come back with me. Otherwise, I'll kill this young gigolo. Michael was young and full of vigor, and immediately started shouting, Old fart. How dare you threaten me? When Michael's special guards heard their young master speak, they gathered around. His family had the strength. But I didn't dare to get too deeply involved. Our baby is gone. I didn't continue, but just turned around and left, pulling Tommy along. Afam and his bodyguards rushed forward, but were blocked by Michael's special guards. Don't go. You said you loved me. I don't believe all that in that diary is false. The hoarse shouts behind me rang in my ears. 3 years ago, I was under surveillance all the time. And every step I took was obstructed. So I bribed some connections to block my information, and I gave Ethan a big gift. I wanted him to remember me all the time. To make him remember how my baby and I died in despair while he was passionately in love with his new sweetheart at that time. To magnify his guilt infinitely. And every day in the future. The sense of guilt that would be triggered when he touched happiness would follow him all his life. What was written in that diary was half true and half false. Tommy's mother was my partner. And I recognized Tommy as my godson. Ethan still didn't give up. He secretly took Tommy's hair for a test. The test result made him depressed for a long time. He had to accept that our baby was gone. On the day he got engaged to Gina, the baby went to another family. A family where the parents loved each other. 14th and didn't go back to his country. He found out my address. Compared with looking for a needle in a haystack 3 years ago. I'm not surprised that he can find these things out now. I had already let go. After all, 3 years had passed. And there was no need to hide from him anymore. Natalie, give me a chance to make it up to you. Okay? Ethan stopped me. The Ethan I knew was always arrogant and superior. At this moment, he bent down to me and begged me over and over again. I paused for a moment and looked at this man who had once been with me. With a cold expression, if everything can be made up for, then what was I 3 years ago? Who was desperate and had no way out? Ethan, we are all adults. Let's be a bit more decent. I paused for a moment and remembered the words he had given me before. Let's part on good terms. Ethan still wanted to come forward, but was stopped by my assistant Leo. Sir, please respect yourself. Leo's tone was gentle, but there was an air of authority without anger. If you continue to pester, we will take legal measures to deport you back to your country. Leo opened the back seat, raised his hand to protect my head, and sent me into the car. Ethan gritted his teeth and stared at Leo's overly intimate action. Who are you? After closing the car door, Leo calmly handed his business card to Ethan. I'm Leo. Ms. Natalie's personal assistant. If you have anything, make an appointment with me first to arrange Ms. Natalie's time. The car moved forward smoothly. I looked back once. Ethan clenched his fists and stared fixedly in the direction we were leaving. I couldn't help but laugh and teased Leo sitting in the passenger seat. Leo, you always seem so honest. I didn't expect you to be so good at getting on someone's nerves. Leo's face showed no expression. This is my job. TSK. No sense of humor. Boring. I bowed my head to deal with the documents. In the corner out of my sight, Leo stared at the figure in the rearview mirror and clenched his fists. 15 Thanks to Leo's actions, I rarely saw Ethan again. I affirmed his workability and increased his year and bonus commission by another 2%. Leo still had no expression. He brought a cup of brown sugar water and a warm keeping patch and placed them on my desk. I slapped my forehead. No wonder I had been so irritable these days. My period had come. I slumped on the sofa, and Leo arranged the lunch boxes neatly in front of me. Why isn't it from the place I usually eat at? Leo took out chopsticks and a spoon from the lunch bag and handed them to me unhurriedly, saying, "This is the chicken soup I made myself. Don't eat takeout these days." I pursed my lips. It was hard to refuse homemade soup. But I was on a diet recently. Just as I was in a dilemma, Leo had already scooped out a bowl and handed it to me, saying softly, "I've skimmed off the oil in the soup. You won't gain weight." I couldn't help but sigh. Whoever becomes your wife in the future will have to set off firecrackers to celebrate for 3 days and 3 nights. Leo looked down at me drinking the soup, and a flash of an emotion I didn't understand passed across his face. His lips parted, and he was about to speak, when he was interrupted by 2 childish voices. "Godmother! Godmother! Natalie! Your godson and I have come to see you." Tommy and Michael rushed over and were caught firmly by Leo in front of me. "Godmother, will you go to the amusement park with me?" Tommy hugged my leg. I covered my faintly aching stomach and forced a smile. "Another day. Okay? Godmother doesn't feel well today." Seeing this, Tommy's round eyes rolled around, and he shouted happily, "I have a sister. Right?" His chubby face rubbed against my stomach. "Godmother, you've finally agreed to Godfather to have a sister for me." "Me?" I glared at Michael, who was shrinking aside, poking his fingers and pretending to be an innocent quail. Leo stood up, grabbed Tommy by the collar and dragged him out. "Father Leo has prepared some summer vacation homework for you." When he came back, I had just finished scolding Michael for not making Tommy fool around. Seeing that Michael was about to drink the chicken soup, Leo walked over in a few strides and snatched the soup away. "Leo, what do you mean?" Michael frowned in dissatisfaction. Leo had a cold face and the corner of his mouth twitched slightly. "If you drink this soup, you'll get impotence." Damn it. 16 I saw Ethan again in the conference room of my company. As a client, I don't accept handouts. But for what I earn through my efforts, I don't refuse. Ethan was completely different from before. He was all business and couldn't be faulted. However, Michael became more and more unreasonable and squatted in my office every day. Wherever I went, he followed, but I could do nothing about it. He was distantly related to my partner. He was of Chinese-British mixed blood and the youngest son in his family, a young master doted on by everyone. After he interrupted my project meetings with Ethan countless times, I lost my temper. Michael was stunned for a moment, and his European-style peach blossom eyes were instantly filled with grievance. It won't happen again. Since then, Michael had been quiet for a while. He also stopped wearing his leather jacket and changed into a suit instead. His long hair past his ears was gelled, and he actually had a bit of a calm temperament. When the kid dressed up, he looked quite presentable. Michael put the contract on the table and retorted, "I'm not a kid. I've grown up." For some reason, he ran back home to inherit a company and came to talk to me about cooperation. When it came to work, he was sleepy and hungry, and on the verge of falling asleep. But whenever it involved Ethan, He immediately became vigilant, like a puppy guarding its food, squinting his eyes, not hiding his malice at all. Although I felt a bit uneasy, I still thought he was just throwing a young master's tantrum. Until at the celebration banquet for the successful completion of the project, Ethan raised his glass and gently clinked it with mine. His eyes deep. Natalie, we are still as compatible as before. It's not too much to say that we are made for each other. Before he finished speaking, suddenly the lights went dim and a soothing and romantic concerto played. When the lights came on again, Michael walked towards me with Ecuadorian roses in his arms. He knelt on one knee in front of me and held a diamond ring up to me. Natalie, will you marry me? I quickly pulled him up and lowered my voice. Are you crazy? I'm 11 years older than you. Michael held my hand instead and said in a aggrieved tone, do you dislike me for being too young? I've grown up. I can also be mature and steady. I let out a sigh and gently pushed his hand away. You don't need to change for anyone. I just regard you as a mischievous younger brother. Michael's eyes dimmed for a moment. And then hope rose again. Then get used to regarding me as your lover. When I didn't know how to respond to make him give up, Leo took off his coat and put it on my shoulders and led me off the stage. When I returned to the villa, I breathed a sigh of relief. Leo brought me a bowl of calming tea, turned around and stood behind me, gently rubbing my temples with his fingertips. Thank you. It's my job. My partner made a phone call to me. I pursed my lips and pressed the answer button. Good for you. Stop making fun of me. I'm going crazy. Michael. Half Chinese and half English. His height. And he is worth hundreds of millions. Why isn't he a good match? I'm 11 years older than him. He's just a kid. Immediately, Michael's impatient voice came from the other end. I'm not a kid. Natalie. I really like you. Really like you. Michael was about to say something more when he was interrupted by Tommy's mother. He is 19 years old. It's different from our country here. You can get married. If you are worried about his family, don't worry. His family is very open-minded and lets Michael do whatever he likes. Even if you act like a bitch, his family still has the ability to support him. I'm not speaking for him. What I'm saying is the truth. 17 at the age of 30. It's the time to strive. I righteously refused Michael. He still didn't give up and stayed in my company in the name of work, secretly competing with Ethan. I had to avoid them as much as possible and let Leo communicate with them. Leo could always make proper arrangements, and I had a comfortable period of time. But such a good time soon ended. Ethan had some wine and made a drunken scene at my doorstep. Natalie, what do I have to do to make you forgive me? I'll give you everything I have. All of it. Come home with me. Okay? Michael, who was making a fuss with him, was also there. Your dirty stuff is not even wanted in the trash can. Natalie, don't take his. Take mine. Mine is clean. I pinched the bridge of my nose and took off the face mask I had just put on, resisting the urge to give each of them a slap outside. I made a phone call to Michael's family and asked them to pick up the drunk Michael. The quarrel outside the door still didn't stop. Actually, Ethan didn't regard Michael as his rival, but he was a little wary of Leo. He firmly believed that Natalie didn't like such impetuous young guys. Whether in terms of character or ability, he was much more stable than Michael, a young master who lived off his parents. Ethan snorted coldly. Michael, provoked by his rival, immediately became irritable. You old and disabled guy. You still dared to snort. Ethan, whose sore spot was touched, became angry with the help of the alcohol. I was in love with Natalie for 10 years and we even had a child. After saying that, Ethan was stunned for a moment. It seemed that his competitiveness was only a little left, and now he even had the tendency to smash the pot. But you still couldn't keep her heart. It shows how bad you are. Michael retorted without hesitation while pushing Ethan outside until the distracted man fell to the ground. When I opened the door, Michael's family just arrived and took their young master away. I had never seen Nian with such a desolate expression. He slumped on the ground with a hurt look, and his eyes looking at me were full of despair. Natalie, do you know? In the 3 years of looking for you, I often had dreams. I dreamed that the child was crying bitterly. He waved his hand and asked me why I didn't want him. My heart felt as if it had been gouged out. I'm sorry, Natalie. I'm really sorry to both of you. Ethan covered his eyes with one hand to protect his remaining dignity, but tears seeped out from between his fingers first. I let out a sigh. Go back. Don't come to me again. We can't go back either. Recalling his once high-spirited appearance. After 3 years of mental torture. At the age of just over 30. A few strands of silver hair had grown in his jet black hair. I felt more and more uncomfortable in my heart. Let this ill-fated relationship end completely. Ethan knelt on both knees and grabbed the corner of my clothes. Please give me one more chance. I'm doomed to be at your mercy in my life. Have pity on me. Forgive me. Okay? I didn't turn around. Silence was my answer. Falling once in the same place is enough. What has been done cannot be undone. But one can strive for the future. 18 Under the street lamp. Ethan could no longer suppress his surging emotions. He clutched the shirt on his chest, curled up in the corner, and let out bursts of wails. He could only watch his lover gradually go away. Natalie had her back to him and never turned around once. He thought that parting in life or death was the most painful. The encounter that was within reach, but seemed so far away, was the most agonizing and unbearable. The person who was leaving was the gold he had discovered when he was young. But now, that gold no longer belonged to him, and had completely abandoned him. In the corner without his presence, the gold still shone with a charming light. He had to admit it. Without him, Natalie still lived well. He had never been the only one. In this entanglement, only he remained in the same place. Forever remaining in the same place. The end.